What brings you to the Ford rally? You've got a great table here, you've got some materials. Tell us a bit about what brought you here.
Well, we're here to oppose the Ford government, specifically the cutbacks that are coming down on healthcare. This is something that does not need to be happening in this province. He's decided instead to give billions of dollars in tax cuts to rich people and, tens of thousands of dollars to things like, horse racing, rather than giving it to the people who actually need it. Ultimately, this is a process that we see from Conservatives all the time, and the plan generally is they want to defund the system sufficiently to be able to actually make it, to make people angry enough with the system that it becomes privatized. That's what they want to do ultimately, and that's what Conservatives have been doing for 40 years.
Why would they want it to be privatized?
Because people make lots and lots of money. If you look at the American healthcare system, right, there are a layer of people making billions and billions of dollars off of that, right? So that's the kind of thing that they want to be doing. And every Conservative government, whether being federal or provincial, has been trying to do the same thing. The problem, of course, is in Canada, healthcare and universal healthcare is incredibly popular.
Fair, yeah. I mean, we do really like being able to go to the doctors and get treatment without millions of dollars.
Yeah, without that being mortgaging the rest of your life.
Yeah, seriously.
It happens in the American healthcare system. We see it all the time.
Yeah. So when the healthcare system is privatized, does that benefit anyone except the rich?
No, it just benefits the rich. It makes things harder for working people. It makes things harder for the vast majority of the population. And we've seen that, again, you can take a look at the American example, because it's the one industrialized country that is a holdout as far as public health care is concerned. Everyone else has public health care, and generally the population likes it because it means that you can, in fact, treat your most vulnerable and the people who are injured and sick. Yeah. We live in a society with enough wealth to do that. It's absolutely absurd that we would want to set up a system that doesn't allow it.
Wow. So you feel that Ford's cuts are directly towards making the system so bad that private companies can come in, sort of take it over, offer better, and then jack up the prices later?
Yeah, that's the standard. In fact, Noam Chomsky has a famous quote around this, right? That's the plan, is you defund it till people get angry enough with the system, and then the private sector moves in. They do it with transit, they do it with healthcare, they do it with education. And again, in places where we've seen that sort of advance quite considerably, the US, the UK since 2008, for example, we're actually seeing life expectancies dropping in those countries because they actually have less money going into public health care. And this has a huge impact on people. That's what austerity is about. Wow. It's not about getting rid of, it's not about the fact that, making everyone tighten their belt, because the top 1% of the population isn't tightening anything. They're making money like crazy.
Okay, wow. Now, Conservatives like Doug Ford talk about wanting to reduce spending and have more money for the government, and public health care means that the money from healthcare is going back into the government. Why would they want less money going into the government? I thought that was sort of what they wanted was, they're making cuts so that there's more money for the government.
Yeah, it's not a question of wanting more money for the government. They're giving that money to rich people in tax cuts. That's what the government in Ontario is doing, and that's what frankly, that's what every Conservative government or Republican government has been doing for decades now, since the return of the neoliberal economics in the 80s under Reagan. That was when this all started, right? And so it's not a question of having less money in the coffers of the government specifically or directly. It's about making sure that money that is being brought in taxes flows up to the richest section of the population. Right, the top 1%. We're actually looking at a situation where it's not a trickle-down economy, it's a trickle-up. Well, in fact, it's a gush-up, right? Wow. When you look at the amount of money that's being made by the richest in society right now, it's quite astounding. Since the economic crisis in 2008, the top 10% of the population has been they've actually made up not only the losses out of 2008, but they have in fact taken more money out of the pockets of working people and made themselves richer as a result of it. All of the wealth that has been generated, in particular in the advanced industrialized countries, has gone to that top of the population. Very little of it's trickling down to people here.
So you're telling me that since the financial crisis, the poor people are still making less money, but the rich people have started actually making more money?
Yes. Yes,
How?
Well, what they're doing is squeezing workers more, right? I mean, that's the main thing, is you continue to squeeze the workers. They use the economic crisis, say, look, it's a bad economy, you need to take a pay cut, you need to take concessions in your union contract, you need to take, a little bit of a belt tightening. This is what we see all the time. We were just talking about the throne speech in the UK, where the Queen is sitting on... It's a little distracting. Queen is
Hang
sitting...
on, Siobhan, just get that. Amazing. All right, sorry, come on back up.
So
Sorry,
yeah, I mean, you've got a situation where the throne
speech.
speech is saying to people that they need to tighten their belts, and this is coming from a woman with $1 million hat on. You know what I mean? It's sort of, come on, she's not tightening her belt. The Queen isn't tightening her belt. None of the rich people in this society are tightening their belts, right? They're doing fine. They're making away like bandits. It's working people who are getting squeezed and squeezed and squeezed.
So Ford, who says that he's for the sort of the working class, buck-a-beer, rugged, regular working citizen, is actually helping the public sector essentially get bought out by the private sector so that the working person has to pay more for healthcare.
Yeah.
So that his rich friends can make more money from healthcare.
That's what he's doing. He's appointing an awful lot of his own friends into various different positions, very, very lucrative positions in the bureaucracy in this province, right? I mean, he's not in it for the little guy. He never has been in it for the little guy, and none or any of the people on the right wing. I mean, that's what they're there for. The corporations. Their entire job is to be able to make sure that the corporations get richer, and it's not just the Tories. The Tories are the worst at it, but I mean the Liberals are doing the same thing in this country, right? I mean, take a look at what Justin Trudeau's doing with his with SNC-Lavalin, right? It's like they're getting tons of money from SNC-Lavalin, and therefore they're turning around and saying that this company doesn't need to deal with prosecutions around shady dealings, that type of thing. And that's the way it works, right? We have both parties of Bay Street that are ultimately there to be able to make sure that the bosses get richer and the working people get poorer.
So, okay, obviously this is a cycle that's really horrible for the average Canadian and really great for Wall Street. God, is there a way aside from violent revolution, which someone just suggested to me over there, to how can we fix this without a violent revolution and a lot of strikes?
Well, I mean, I think those two things are very different. Strikes and violent revolution can be very different things.
Fair.
Strikes ultimately are about shutting down the spot where the rich people who control the political system it's where they make their money, right? And so that's the kind of thing that's actually going to have to happen. And you can see around the world that this does happen. It does happen from time to time. Look at what's happening in Sudan right now. People went out onto the streets and overthrew a government in a situation where protesting in the streets meant you got shot at. But they were still able to pull it together, and they've been able to put together an uprising that is rocking the foundations of the system in that country. Now, that's just one example, but we see it fairly routinely. In this country, what we need is for all the people who are in this crowd to sit down. Right? Sit down tools, because that's the point at which the system grinds to a halt. And when the system grinds to a halt, we need something radically different. And we're in a spot right now where we need a radical redistribution of wealth and power, or we're going to end up with a much, much more dangerous system under our control. The main problem, of course, is that it can result in fascism, and that's the thing that we're starting to see the development of in Canada and the US, across Europe. The reason why those far-right fascist groups are growing is because they feed off of despair. Right? And as long as people are feeling like their life is not going to get any better, then they can be won to, the idea of a dictatorship being able to come in and take over.
Wow.
That's the foundation of every fascism that's ever existed. It requires an economic despair as the baseline. And then people start looking for an alternative, and that alternative can go any of a number of different directions. Either you can point your anger towards the people at the top of society who are causing the poverty and misery, or there's going to be fascists around saying it's not really the people at the top of society, it's the black people, it's the brown people, and that's the way that operates, right? And that's why we're seeing the development of this right now.
Wow. So if any white supremacists are watching this, maybe direct your anger towards the rich who are actually doing this to you instead of to ethnic groups who are also victims like you are.
Yeah, I mean, we need solidarity amongst people, working people, no matter what color they are, no matter the ethnicity, no matter the religion. And that's the only way we're going to be able to stop this.
Yeah. Wow. So striking is sort of for people who work in healthcare. Is there anything like for the average millennial with a retail job who, if they go on strike, it's not going to do much? What What can the average person do here?
Well, I mean, I think there's a number of different things you can do. You can join the social movements. There are social movements beyond the union movements that are actually moving on this kind of stuff. And you can also get involved in some of the other campaigns. There's a general strike being called tomorrow in Toronto. Now, it's not being called by the union, so it's not going to be that kind of sort of major shutdown that would be required. At the same time, it's a spot for working people who may be, on their own in a workplace to be able to come out and join some kind of an event that is going to be able to push back against this. And so that's what I would be looking at, is looking at where the social movements are. The other thing is try to organize yourself a union. Wherever you're able to do that, that's where you're going to be able to actually help out. Because if one person stands up and says, I'm going to walk out, as you say, they're going to get canned. If everybody stands up and says they're going to walk out, it's a completely different thing.
Yeah.
We've already seen this from the students, the student walkouts that happened 3 weeks ago, right? I mean, students were being told that if they walked out, their principals were saying that they would be expelled, that they would be punished, until all the students banded together and said, you can't punish all of us.
Wow.
And that seems to be that's how solidarity is built.
Yeah. This is humans. United, we are stronger than the rich.
Yes.
On our own, the rich will just shoot us.
Yes, exactly.
Or fire us in Canada. Shooting is more Sudan. I mean, that is inspiring that Sudan got there. That's really impressive.
Somewhere, and there's going to be more stuff that they need to do. They need to actually take it to the next level, and again take it to the workplaces. But at the same time, it's good. You can see the point is that uprisings can reach a point where there are enough people on the streets and enough people saying no that you can actually rock the foundations of the system.
Yeah. So here's my question then. My last question for you. I've taken up a lot of your time. My last question is, with all of this, and Ford is just trying to sell off public services so that eventually the private sector can come in and make more money off of the backs of the average person. How did he get elected? How did someone who just wants to fleece the average person get elected by the average person?
Well, I mean, there's people often vote against their own interests, right? I mean, they don't necessarily know what he is going to do when he gets into power, and so that's part of the problem. The other problem, I mean, there's lots of different issues. The electoral system is completely distorted in this country. When you look at it, in Ontario, there's 10 million eligible voters. He got 2.2 million votes, which means 78% of the population in this country, or in this province that was eligible to vote, didn't vote for the guy. But you still end up with a majority government under those circumstances. That's the way the first past the post system works, and so that's a problem in and of itself. But people also are looking for something to change, and the reality is that if we keep going back and forth between two different parties of Bay Street, one being the Liberals and one being the Tories, nothing is going to change. And that's the pattern in this country, right? You elect the Liberals until they're so odious that you kick them out, and elect the Conservatives until they're so odious that you kick them out. It's because there isn't an alternative, right? People need some kind of alternative, and when that alternative, a good anti-racist, against climate change, for working people alternative does develop, people are flocking to that banner. You can look at Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in the U.S. right now. Her policies are now more popular than anything that the Republicans have in place because she's putting forward some bold ideas. Right now, of course, the establishment's going to do everything it can to try to take her down. The right wing can't stop talking about her. I mean, Fox News has a dedicated segment to her every day now. It's just it's ridiculous. But it's because she's putting forward some bold policies that are talking about reshaping wealth and power and being able to put power back in the hands of working people, at least on some level. And as soon as that gets put forward, we see people flocking to it. Bernie Sanders, Jeremy Corbyn. These are examples. In Quebec Solidaire, right? A left group that was putting forward some bold policies on climate change, on racism, on poverty, talking about increasing minimum wage. And they went from being a tiny little fringe party to taking 10 seats in the last election because they were able to put forward some bold policies, despite the fact that they were constantly being attacked for being radicals and being socialists and all of that kind of thing. In fact, the more they were attacked, the more their numbers went up because people were saying, I'm looking for an alternative. Doug Ford put himself forward as an alternative because we had the Liberals in power for more than a decade, and so people are going to look for that, even if it doesn't make any sense when you actually look at where the policies are.
Yeah, they were looking for an alternative. He was the alternative, so he wins.
To some extent, that's what happened with Trump. right?
Yeah.
And if you've got Hillary Clinton saying America's already great in a situation where things are actually getting much harder for the majority of the population, then she's got no resonance, right? He can stand up and say whatever buffoonery he wants to say, but as long as it's some kind of change, people go, well, maybe that's a change. We're looking for something. Because ultimately, again, you elect one of the two bosses' parties, and they've been doing so for decades, and what's changed? Things have gotten worse, just getting worse and worse and worse for the majority of the population. And
So we need real change, not just one of the two parties posing and saying, hey, we're different now.
yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
I mean, that's the way to do it, and the only way that's actually going to happen is if the working people actually band together and put themselves out on demonstrations like this, but also taking it to the next level, taking it to the point of strikes, taking it to the point of shutdowns. That's the way you end up changing the system.
Wow. All right. Well, listen, sir, you have been absolutely fantastic. I really appreciate your time. Thank you for giving us all of your insights. You've clearly done a lot of research. You had some Noam Chomsky quotes there. I really appreciate all your insights. Thank
right,
you very
wonderful.
much. Thanks for being on Canadian Love.
All right, thanks, man.